My name is Jessica, and I'm only alive today because I happened to adopt a rescue cat 3 weeks before my ex-boyfriend tried to kill me. I know that sounds dramatic, but there's no other way to describe what happened. Trevor didn't use a gun or a knife. He was much more calculating than that. He tried to make it look like an accident, and he almost succeeded. I met Trevor at a hardware store, of all places. I was buying supplies to fix a leaky faucet in my apartment, completely clueless about what I actually needed, and he approached me with this charming smile and offered to help. He knew exactly what tools I needed, explained how to fix the problem step by step, and even offered to come help me install everything if I got stuck. He seemed like the perfect gentleman. Knowledgeable, helpful, and genuinely interested in making sure I didn't get ripped off by hiring an expensive plumber. That should have been my first red flag. Trevor knew too much about too many things. He was an HVAC technician by trade, which meant he understood heating systems, ventilation, gas lines, and basically every system that keeps a house running safely. During our relationship, he was constantly fixing things in my apartment that I didn't even know were broken. He'd notice a loose electrical outlet, a draft coming from a window, or a weird noise from my water heater, and he'd insist on fixing it right away. At first, I found his expertise attractive. I'd never dated someone so handy, so capable of taking care of practical problems. My apartment had never been in better condition. Trevor installed a new thermostat, fixed my garbage disposal, and even replaced some old pipes under my kitchen sink. He said he wanted me to be safe and comfortable, that taking care of my living space was his way of taking care of me. But Trevor's helpfulness came with strings attached. Every time he fixed something, he'd lecture me about how dangerous it could have been if he hadn't noticed the problem. He'd show me exactly what could have gone wrong: electrical fires, gas leaks, carbon monoxide poisoning, and explain in vivid detail how these accidents kill people every year. He said most people don't understand how fragile the systems in their homes are, how easy it is for something to go wrong when you least expect it.
Trevor also had this obsession with keys. He insisted on having a spare key to my apartment in case of emergencies, and he was constantly checking to make sure my doors and windows were locked properly. He installed additional deadbolts and security chains without asking, saying he was worried about my safety living alone. When I pointed out that I'd lived in the same apartment for 2 years without any problems, he'd launch into statistics about break-ins and assaults, making me feel naive and vulnerable for not being more paranoid about my security. Our relationship lasted 8 months, and by the end, I felt completely dependent on Trevor's expertise. He'd convinced me that my apartment was a death trap without his constant maintenance and oversight. Every weird noise, every flickering light, every slightly unusual smell would send me into a panic, and I'd call Trevor to come assess whether it was dangerous. He always found something wrong, always had a repair that needed to be done immediately to prevent disaster. The breaking point came when Trevor started talking about moving in together. Not because our relationship was progressing naturally, but because he was convinced I couldn't survive without his daily monitoring of my living situation. He said I was too trusting, too careless about safety, and that he'd never forgive himself if something happened to me when he could have prevented it. When I told him I wasn't ready to live together, that I valued my independence and wanted to take our relationship slower, his reaction was terrifying. Trevor didn't get angry. He got cold. He stared at me with this calculating expression and said, "You don't understand how dangerous the world is, Jessica. You don't understand how many ways things can go wrong when someone isn't looking out for you."
What the technician found made my blood run cold. Someone had deliberately tampered with my water heater's venting system. The exhaust pipe that was supposed to carry carbon monoxide safely outside had been partially disconnected and redirected so that the deadly gas was being pumped directly into my bedroom through a small hole that had been drilled in the wall behind my bed. The modification was subtle but deadly. During the day, when I wasn't running hot water frequently, the carbon monoxide levels were low enough that I'd just feel slightly unwell. But at night, when the water heater would cycle on and off to maintain temperature, the gas would build up in my bedroom while I slept. If I hadn't adopted Luna, if she hadn't woken me up with her crying every night, I would have died in my sleep within another week or two. The gas technician said the tampering was professional work, done by someone who understood HVAC systems and knew exactly how to create a slow, undetectable leak that would look like equipment failure. When I told him about my ex-boyfriend's profession and our recent breakup, he immediately called the police. The investigation revealed that Trevor had been entering my apartment regularly since our breakup, using the spare key I'd forgotten to get back from him. He'd made the initial modification to my water heater the night after I broke up with him, and he'd been returning every few days to make small adjustments, gradually increasing the amount of carbon monoxide being diverted into my bedroom. The police found evidence on his work laptop that he'd been researching carbon monoxide poisoning deaths, looking up how long it takes for someone to die from exposure and how to make the tampering look like accidental equipment failure. He'd planned to discover my body himself, probably by showing up for some manufactured emergency, and play the role of the devastated ex-boyfriend who'd tried to warn me about the dangers of living alone. Trevor was arrested and charged with attempted murder. During the trial, the prosecution revealed that he'd done something similar to a previous girlfriend 3 years earlier, but she'd survived because a neighbor had smelled gas and called the fire department. That case had been ruled accidental equipment failure because no one had suspected deliberate tampering. The most chilling part of Trevor's plan was how perfectly it would have worked if not for Luna. Carbon monoxide is called the silent killer because it's odorless and colorless, and the symptoms mimic so many other conditions. I would have just gotten progressively sicker until I didn't wake up one morning, and everyone would have assumed it was a tragic accident. The modified water heater would have looked like normal equipment failure, and Trevor would have been seen as the caring ex-boyfriend who'd tried to warn me about home safety. Trevor was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. During his sentencing hearing, he showed no remorse. He actually looked at me and said, "I told you that you didn't understand how dangerous things could be without someone looking out for you. I was just trying to prove my point." That statement revealed the true depth of his twisted logic. In Trevor's mind, he wasn't trying to murder me. He was trying to demonstrate that I needed him, that my independence was an illusion, and that refusing his protection would inevitably lead to my death. He'd convinced himself that attempting to kill me was an act of love, a way of showing me how vulnerable I was without him. I've moved to a different city now, and I live in a house instead of an apartment. I have 3 carbon monoxide detectors, and I have every system in my house inspected by certified professionals every 6 months. I never let anyone I'm dating do repairs or maintenance on my home, no matter how minor the problem seems. Most importantly, I still have Luna. She lives like a queen now with the best food and toys I can afford. I tell everyone who will listen that she saved my life, not just because she detected the carbon monoxide, but because she had the persistence to wake me up night after night until I finally listened to what she was trying to tell me. The experience taught me that the most dangerous predators aren't always the ones who threaten you directly. Sometimes the most lethal person in your life is the one who presents themselves as your protector, who convinces you that you're helpless without their expertise, and who has the knowledge and access to hurt you in ways that look completely accidental. Trevor almost succeeded in killing me because he understood that the best murders don't look like murders at all. He knew that carbon monoxide would take me quietly, peacefully, in my sleep, and everyone would mourn the tragic accident that took such a young life. If I hadn't adopted a cat who loved me enough to keep trying to save me night after night, I would just be another statistic. Another person who died alone from a faulty water heater that no one suspected had been deliberately modified by someone who claimed to love me.
My name is David, and after what happened with my ex-girlfriend Valentina, I've never looked at mirrors the same way again. It's been 8 months since we broke up, but every time I walk past one, I feel that cold chill on the back of my neck, like someone is watching me from the other side. It all began 2 years ago when I met Valentina in a cafe near the university. She was studying psychology and I was in engineering. She was incredibly beautiful, with those green eyes that seemed to pierce right through your soul, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. At first, her intensity drew me in. She'd send me messages at 3 in the morning, asking what I was thinking about, show up at my work with coffee and pastries, and always knew exactly what to say to make me feel special. But that intensity soon turned into something darker. She started going through my phone when she thought I wasn't looking. She asked strange questions about my past, about ex-girlfriends from years ago, as if she was archiving every detail in her mind. If I didn't answer her calls right away, she'd show up at my apartment without warning, crying and saying she'd had nightmares that something had happened to me. What disturbed me most was her obsession with mirrors. Valentina had this strange habit of watching me when she thought I wasn't aware, especially when I was in the bathroom mirror in the mornings. I'd catch her standing in the doorway, completely still, her gaze fixed and intense. When I asked her what she was doing, she always gave the same answer: "I just like watching you exist." The breaking point came one night when I woke up and found her sitting on the floor of my bedroom holding a hand mirror, watching me sleep through the reflection. When I turned on the light and yelled at her, demanding what the hell she was doing, she became hysterical. She began sobbing uncontrollably, saying that the real world felt too direct, too raw, and that she could only process me through reflections because that way she felt safer, more in control. That was the last straw. I told her our relationship was over, that she needed professional help, and that I couldn't be with someone who watched me like a specimen in a lab. Her reaction was completely unexpected. She calmed down instantly, as if a switch had been flipped, smiled at me with that icy smile I'll never forget, and said, "That's fine, David, but you know you can't escape mirrors
For the
forever."
first few weeks after the breakup, everything seemed normal. I changed the locks on my apartment, blocked her number, and tried to move on with my life. But then, strange things started happening. Small things at first. I noticed the mirrors in my apartment were slightly out of place. The bathroom mirror, which I always kept perfectly centered, would be tilted a few degrees to the left. The mirror on my dresser was angled so that it directly reflected my bed. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that the stress of the breakup was getting to me. But then I found fingerprints on the surface of the mirrors. Small, delicate fingerprints I knew all too well, because I had seen Valentina press those same fingers against the glass countless times. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me. My apartment was completely dark, but a sliver of streetlight slipped through the curtains and faintly illuminated the dresser mirror. And there, in the reflection, I saw a silhouette. It wasn't in my room. It was in the mirror. I slowly sat up, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The figure in the reflection moved, but when I turned to look at the real room, there was no one there. It was as if Valentina had found a way to exist only in reflections, watching me from that parallel world of glass. Over the next few days, the appearances became more frequent and clearer. I saw her in the bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth,
in the reflection of my office window, in the black surface of my phone when the screen was off. Always the same expression, that unsettling smile, and those eyes following me with a chilling intensity. I decided to cover every mirror in my apartment with sheets. For a week, I lived in a world without reflections, and for the first time in months, I was able to sleep peacefully. But Valentina found another way to reach me. She began sending me photographs by email from fake addresses, photos of me taken from impossible angles, as if she had taken them from inside the mirrors I had covered.
My name is Sarah, and I work the night shift at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. I've been doing this job for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunk college students, truckers passing through, insomniacs looking for somewhere to sit that isn't their empty apartments. But nothing prepared me for what started happening after I broke up with my boyfriend Marcus 6 months ago. Marcus and I met at this same diner actually. He was one of those truckers I mentioned, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and a slice of apple pie. He'd sit in booth 7 for hours, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring out the window at the empty highway. At first, I found his quiet intensity attractive. He seemed mysterious, worldly, like someone who had stories to tell. We started dating after he got a local job at the shipping warehouse. He said he was tired of life on the road, that he wanted to settle down with someone special. That someone was supposed to be me. For the first few months, everything was perfect. He'd bring me flowers from the grocery store across the street, pick me up after my shifts, and we'd watch the sunrise together before I went asleep for the day. But Marcus had this thing about control that I didn't notice until it was too late. He needed to know everything about my life, especially about my work. He'd ask detailed questions about every customer who came in, what they ordered, how long they stayed, whether any of them talked to me beyond just placing their order. At first, I thought he was just being protective, maybe a little jealous, which I found kind of sweet. Then he started showing up at the diner during my shifts, not to eat or spend time with me, but to sit in his truck in the parking lot and watch. He said he was worried about my safety, working alone at night with all kinds of strangers coming through. When I told him it made me uncomfortable, that my manager had noticed and asked questions, he got angry, really angry. He said I was being ungrateful, that he was sacrificing his sleep to make sure nothing happened to me. The breaking point came when I found out he'd been asking other customers about me. A regular, this sweet old man named Frank who comes in every Tuesday for coffee and a donut, mentioned that some guy had approached him in the parking lot asking questions about the waitress with the red hair. Frank said the guy seemed unstable, kept asking if I ever talked about my personal life, if I seemed lonely, if I ever mentioned having a boyfriend. When I confronted Marcus about it, he didn't even try to deny it. He said he was conducting his own security assessment, making sure I wasn't giving strangers too much information about myself. That's when I realized how deep his paranoia ran, and more importantly, how much of it was focused on controlling me rather than protecting me. I broke up with him that night in the parking lot after my shift. His reaction was terrifying. He didn't cry or beg like I expected. Instead, he went completely silent, staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes. After what felt like an eternity, he just nodded slowly and said, "I understand, but you know I can't just disappear from your life, Sarah. We're connected now." For the first week after the breakup, nothing happened. Marcus didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at the diner. I actually started to believe that maybe he'd accepted it and moved on. But then the phone calls started. Not to my personal phone, Marcus was smarter than that. The calls came to the diner's landline, always between 2 and 4 a.m. when the place was usually empty except for me. The caller would ask for me specifically, and when I'd answer, there would just be breathing on the other end. Sometimes I could hear music playing faintly in the background, always the same song. "Stand By Me" by Ben E. King. It was the song that had been playing on the radio the first time Marcus kissed me. I started hanging up immediately when I heard the breathing, but the calls kept coming, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a single shift. I told my manager, Pete, about it, but he just said it was probably some creep who'd seen me working and got fixated. He installed caller ID on the phone, but the calls always showed up as unknown number. Then customers started acting weird around me. Not all of them, just certain ones. They'd come in, order something small like coffee or a piece of pie, and then spend their entire time just watching me. Not in a creepy, sexual way, it was more clinical than that, like they were studying me. When I'd try to make conversation, they'd give short, awkward answers and avoid eye contact. The strangest part was that these customers all had similar physical characteristics. Middle-aged white men, usually wearing baseball caps pulled low over their faces, driving older model trucks or sedans. They'd sit in different booths, but they all had the same mannerisms. The way they held their coffee cups, the way they checked their phones, the way they left exact change on the table before leaving. It took me embarrassingly long to realize what was happening. Marcus was hiring people to watch me. I don't know how he found them or what he was paying them, but he'd created this network of surveillance that made me feel like I was constantly being monitored and reported on. The confirmation came when one of his watchers made a mistake. It was around 3 a.m. on a Thursday, and this guy in a John Deere cap had been sitting in booth 3 for over an hour, nursing the same cup of coffee and glancing at me every few minutes. When he got up to leave, he dropped his phone, and I heard Marcus's voice clearly through the speaker. "Has she talked to anyone new tonight? Any regulars acting different around her?" I didn't confront the guy. I was too scared. Instead, I started paying closer attention to these watchers, trying to figure out their patterns. They usually came in alone, stayed for exactly 1 hour, and always left within a few minutes of each other if there were multiple ones during the same shift. They never ordered food, only drinks. And they all had this nervous energy, like they were uncomfortable with whatever they'd been asked to do. The situation escalated when Marcus started using these people to send me messages. They'd leave things behind: newspaper clippings about missing persons cases, printed emails about stalking laws, sometimes just handwritten notes that said things like, "Loneliness is dangerous," or "Some people care more than others." The note that finally pushed me to call the police was left under my windshield wiper after my shift one morning. It was written in Marcus's handwriting, and it said, "I know you think I'm crazy, but I'm the only one who really sees you. The watchers see you too now. They understand what I understand. You're too trusting, Sarah. Someone needs to protect you from yourself." When I showed the note to the police, they took it seriously enough to file a report, but they said that without direct threats or evidence of Marcus physically stalking me himself, there wasn't much they could do. The officer I spoke with suggested I document everything, get security cameras installed at work, and consider getting a restraining order. Pete installed the cameras, but they only covered the dining area, not the parking lot. The restraining order was more complicated because I couldn't prove Marcus was directly responsible for the watchers, and the people he'd hired weren't technically threatening me, they were just watching. Things got worse after I filed the police report. The watchers became more aggressive, not in their behavior toward me, but in their presence. Instead of one at a time, sometimes there would be 2 or 3 in the diner simultaneously. They'd sit in different sections, but I could feel their eyes on me constantly. The phone calls increased too, sometimes coming every 20 minutes throughout my entire shift. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I was working a particularly quiet Tuesday night when a new watcher came in. This one was different from the others, younger, more nervous, and he kept looking toward the kitchen like he was expecting someone. He ordered coffee and sat in booth 7, Marcus's old spot. Around 2:30 a.m., he approached the counter and asked if he could use the bathroom. When I pointed him toward the back, he said, "He's really worried about you, you know. Maybe you should just talk to him." Before I could respond, he handed me a flip phone, one of those old prepaid ones, and said, "He's waiting for your call." I took the phone, not because I wanted to talk to Marcus, but because I was genuinely scared of what would happen if I didn't. The guy went to the bathroom, and I just stood there staring at this phone, knowing that Marcus was probably waiting, probably had been waiting for hours or days for this moment. I turned the phone on, and immediately it started ringing. I answered without saying hello, and Marcus's voice filled the space around me. "I miss you, Sarah. I miss watching you work. You look tired lately. Are you eating enough? The watchers say you seem stressed." I told him he was sick, that what he was doing was illegal, that I wanted him to stop. His response chilled me to the bone. "I'm not doing anything illegal, Sarah. I'm just concerned about your well-being. These people, they volunteer to help me keep an eye on you because they see how much I care. Some of them have daughters your age. They understand." The worst part was how rational he sounded, how he'd convinced himself, and apparently others, that this elaborate surveillance network was an act of love rather than an act of control. When I threatened to call the police again, he just laughed softly and said, "Go ahead. Ask them to investigate people who buy coffee and sit quietly in a public restaurant. Ask them to arrest me for caring about my ex-girlfriend's safety." I hung up and threw the phone in the trash, but the damage was done. I realized that Marcus had created a system where he could watch me constantly without ever technically breaking any laws. The watchers weren't threatening me or approaching me inappropriately. They were just there, always there. Last week, I put in my notice at the diner. I told Pete I was moving back home to stay with my parents until I could figure out my next step. He understood, even offered to give Marcus's description to all the other night shift workers in case he tried to get information about where I'd gone. But here's the thing that keeps me up during the day now. I don't think distance is going to stop Marcus. The night before my last shift, one of the watchers left a final note on my car. It wasn't a threat or a message from Marcus. It was handwritten in different handwriting, and it just said, "We'll miss you too." I realized then that Marcus hadn't just been using these people to watch me. He'd been converting them, sharing his obsession, making them invested in his twisted version of caring. Some of these watchers weren't just doing a job anymore. They'd become true believers in Marcus's delusion that I needed to be protected and monitored. Tomorrow I'm driving 6 hours to my parents' house, and I've already enrolled in online classes so I can finish my degree from there. I've changed my phone number, deleted all my social media, and I'm going to work on becoming invisible for a while. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see headlights behind me that seem to follow the same turns I make, I wonder if invisible is really possible when someone has trained an entire network of people to see you as someone who needs to be watched. Because the scariest thing about Marcus isn't that he's obsessed with me. It's that he's managed to make his obsession feel reasonable to other people. And somewhere out there, in diners and truck stops and 24-hour restaurants, there might still be watchers who remember the red-haired waitress who needed protecting, still keeping an eye out for someone who looks like me, still believing they're doing the right thing.
My name is Alex, and I'm a software developer who thought he understood technology well enough to protect himself from digital harassment. I was wrong. Dead wrong. What my ex-girlfriend Elena did to me over the course of 18 months made me realize that the internet isn't just a tool. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon that can turn your entire digital existence into a prison. Elena and I met through a dating app, which should have been my first clue about how deeply embedded technology was in her life. She was a social media manager for various small businesses, which meant she lived and breathed online engagement. When we first started dating, I was impressed by her digital savvy. She could make anyone's Instagram look professional, knew all the latest apps before they became mainstream, and had this intuitive understanding of how to manipulate algorithms to get maximum visibility. What I didn't realize at the time was that those skills translated into an almost supernatural ability to track, monitor, and manipulate people's digital lives. Alana didn't just use social media, she weaponized it. Our relationship lasted 14 months, and for most of that time, I thought we were happy. Alana was creative, funny, and incredibly intelligent. She introduced me to new restaurants through food blogger accounts she managed, got us into exclusive events through her industry connections, and always seemed to know about cool things happening around the city before anyone else did. But there were warning signs I ignored. Alana had an obsessive need to document everything we did together. Not just the big moments, but everything. She'd take photos of our coffee cups sitting next to each other on the table, screenshot funny text conversations we'd had to post on her story,
and create elaborate Instagram posts about the most mundane activities. She said it was just part of her job, that she needed to maintain an active online presence to stay relevant in her industry. More concerning was how much she knew about my online activity. She'd bring up articles I'd read, videos I'd watched, even comments I'd liked on other people's posts. When I asked how she knew about these things, she'd just shrug and say the algorithm must have shown her the same content. It seemed plausible at the time, but looking back, I realized she'd found ways to monitor everything I did online.
The relationship ended when I discovered Elena had been using my laptop to access my work emails and personal accounts. I caught her one morning before she realized I was awake, typing on my computer with a focus and familiarity that made it clear this wasn't the first time. When I confronted her, she initially denied it, then claimed she was just checking her own email because her phone was dead. But my browser history told a different story. She'd been systematically going through my emails, social media accounts, and even my banking information. The fight that followed was explosive. Elena accused me of being paranoid and controlling, said I was trying to isolate her from the most important parts of my life. She claimed that couples in healthy relationships share everything, including passwords and personal information. When I told her that what she'd done was a violation of my privacy and my trust, she became hysterical, sobbing and saying that she'd only been trying to feel closer to me, to understand me better. I ended it that day. I changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on every account I could think of, and asked Elena to leave my apartment and not contact me again. Her response was eerily calm. She dried her tears, gathered her things, and said, "You can't just delete me from your life, Alex. We're more connected than you realize." For the first few weeks after the breakup, everything seemed normal. Elena didn't call or text, didn't show up at my apartment or my office. I thought maybe she'd accepted the end of our relationship and moved on. But then, strange things started happening to my online presence. It began with my social media accounts acting erratically. Posts I'd made would disappear and reappear, my privacy settings would change without my input, and I'd receive friend requests from obviously fake profiles with no mutual connections. When I declined these requests, they'd come back a few days later from slightly different accounts with similar profile pictures and names. Then my email started receiving subscriptions to random mailing lists, dozens of them. Pet adoption newsletters, conspiracy theory blogs, adult dating sites, pyramid scheme opportunities, political campaigns for candidates I'd never heard of. Every day, I'd wake up to hundreds of unwanted emails, and as soon as I'd unsubscribe from one list, I'd be signed up for 2 more. My phone numbers somehow got added to spam call lists. I'd receive calls at all hours from telemarketers, survey companies, and robotic voices offering me extended warranties for cars I'd never owned. When I changed my number, the calls followed me to the new one within a week. But the most disturbing incidents involved my work accounts. I started receiving emails from clients and colleagues asking about messages I'd supposedly sent them, messages I had no memory of sending. When I checked my sent folder, there was no record of these emails, but multiple people insisted they'd received communications from my email address that were slightly off-brand for me. Nothing inappropriate or damaging, just subtly wrong in tone and content. My boss called me into his office to ask if everything was okay at home. Apparently, I'd been sending project updates at 3 a.m. with unusual formatting and minor spelling errors that weren't typical of my work. When I insisted I hadn't sent those emails, he showed them to me on his phone. They were definitely from my email address, signed with my name, but I had no memory of writing them. That's when I realized Elena hadn't just been monitoring my digital life during our relationship, she'd been infiltrating it. She'd somehow gained access to my accounts in ways that survived password changes, possibly by installing monitoring software on my devices or exploiting security vulnerabilities I didn't know existed. I hired a cybersecurity consultant to audit all my devices and accounts. What he found was terrifying.
Elena had installed sophisticated spyware on my laptop, tablet, and phone that gave her complete access to everything I did online. She could read my emails as I wrote them, see every website I visited, access my cameras and microphones, and even send messages from my accounts without leaving traces in my sent folders. But the spyware was just the beginning. Elena had created an elaborate network of fake accounts and automated systems designed to harass and manipulate me. The fake friend requests, spam emails, and robocalls were all part of a coordinated campaign to make my digital life miserable. She'd program bots to sign me up for mailing lists, automated systems to generate spam calls, and even created fake versions of my work emails to send confusing messages to my colleagues.
The cybersecurity consultant said it was one of the most sophisticated personal harassment campaigns he'd ever seen. Elena had essentially turned her professional skills in social media management and digital marketing into tools for psychological warfare. She'd created a digital version of herself that could exist independently in my online spaces, causing chaos and confusion, even when she wasn't actively involved. Removing all of Elena's digital tentacles from my life took 3 months and cost me thousands of dollars. I had to replace all my devices, create new email addresses, and rebuild my online presence from scratch. Even then, the consultant warned me that some of the damage might be permanent. Once your personal information is out there in certain databases and systems, it's nearly impossible to remove completely. The worst part was the psychological impact. Elena had turned the internet, which had always been my safe space and professional tool, into a source of constant anxiety. Every email, every notification, every friend request became a potential threat. I found myself obsessively checking my privacy settings, changing my passwords weekly, and avoiding social media altogether. But Elena's digital ghost wasn't finished with me. 6 months after I'd supposedly cleaned all her spyware from my devices, I started receiving packages I hadn't ordered. Random items from online retailers, books, kitchen gadgets, clothing in the wrong size, all purchased with payment methods that trace back to accounts I'd closed months earlier. When I contacted the retailers to report fraudulent orders, they showed me confirmation emails from my new email addresses that I'd never created. Elena had somehow preserved access to my financial information and was using it to make purchases in my name, but not to steal from me. The orders were always for items that would be delivered to my address, as if she was trying to remind me that she could still reach into my life whenever she wanted. The final straw came when she started manipulating my professional online presence. My LinkedIn profile was subtly altered, my job title was changed slightly, my work history was edited to include companies I'd never worked for, and my professional photo was replaced with a slightly blurred version that made me look unprofessional. When potential clients looked me up online, they were seeing a version of me that Elena had crafted. I contacted the police, but they said that most of what Elena was doing existed in legal gray areas. The spyware was illegal, but proving she'd installed it was difficult. The fake accounts and automated harassment were annoying, but not necessarily criminal. The unauthorized purchases were fraud, but since the items were being delivered to me, it was hard to prove financial harm. The detective I spoke with suggested I hire a private investigator who specialized in cybercrime, someone who could gather evidence of Elena's activities in a way that would hold up in court. But he also warned me that pursuing legal action might escalate Elena's behavior and could result in more sophisticated attacks on my digital identity. In the end, I decided to disappear digitally. I moved to a different city, took a job with a small company that didn't require a significant online presence, and minimized my digital footprint as much as possible. I use burner phones, pay for everything in cash when I can, and avoid social media entirely. I've essentially gone analog in a digital world.
It's been 8 months since I went dark, and the harassment has mostly stopped. But sometimes I'll get a text from an unknown number with just a heart emoji, or I'll receive a friend request on a social media account I forgot I had, from a profile with no photo and a name I don't recognize. And every time it happens, I'm reminded that Elena is still out there, somewhere in the digital ether, with skills and knowledge that make her capable of reaching into anyone's online life and turning it into a nightmare.
The scariest part isn't that Elena targeted me specifically, it's that her methods could be replicated by anyone with the right technical knowledge and enough obsession. In a world where our entire lives are documented and stored online, we're all vulnerable to someone who understands how to weaponize our digital existence. I've learned that you can change your passwords, install security software, and hire cybersecurity experts, but you can't completely protect yourself from someone who has unlimited time, advanced technical skills, and no moral boundaries. The internet remembers everything, and in the wrong hands, that memory becomes a weapon that can follow you anywhere you try to hide.